Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Monday, March 2nd, 2026, and I'm laughing because this is our third effort to start the show because twice before I said that it was March 3rd. So I am amused that this simple matter of counting is beyond me. Maybe that's because we did two emergency podcasts this weekend with the start of the war, and so I'm therefore, I'm living in a perpetual past, present, future, and can't get the dates right. This is not a problem for my co-panelists here. Executive editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
Senior editor Seth Mandel. Hi, Seth.
Hi, John. And don't worry, we're all still writing March 3rd on our checks.
There we go. No, we're not. Don't. Let's not get into the checks thing again. We already had a whole podcast that jumped off you making a joke about checks, and also, of course, social commentary columnist Christine Rosen. Hi, Christine.
Hi, John. I was going to make a joke about you all abusing our emergency podcast powers, but I'll just let that one go.
You mean we need to go to Congress to authorize
right. You did
the
not
emergency
seek congressional
podcast?
approval for two podcasts.
I mean, the War Powers Act gives us 60 days. That's right.
Okay.
To be
fully
authorized. Okay. So this morning, about an hour before we started recording this, Pete Hegseth and General Caine, the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, gave a joint press conference. A lot of whining over the weekend about how we weren't getting enough information out of the administration, which is funny because it's like we live in this hyped up 24-hour, 300, it was it 60-second, 60-minute, 24-hour, like if we don't hear from them every 5 minutes, it's like they're not telling us what's going on. To be fair to Secretary Hegseth and to General Caine, they're running a war, so give them a break. They did their initial briefing this morning, and it was very illuminative and instructive. And I want to just go through some of the things that we heard pretty much from General Caine. Hegseth started and did a lot of rah-rah stuff and, attacking previous administrations for not being as brave as we are and all of that. And we can sort of put that to one side. Here are the things that we learned from General Caine. So the General Schwarzkopf of this war, the guy who seems to be running the war, is Admiral Brad Cooper. This is his joint command. He is overseeing it, along with Fleet Master Chief Compton, General Pat Frank, who is running sort of the counter missile and counter drone activities, Kurt Renshaw, who is leading the fight against the Iranian Navy, and Air Force Lieutenant, Air Force leading figure Derek France, who is, as General Caine said, crushing Iranian targets from the air. The Space Command, the U.S. Cyber Command, both heavily involved, particularly at the very beginning of the war or in the hour just before everything went active, in order to disrupt the command control communications capabilities of the Iranians. And what we learned is, I think effectively, that it was a month ago, at the very beginning of February, that the command was given to get everything in place to strike. So he said, over the last 30 days, we moved our forces to, quote, reinforce deterrence and provide Americans with credible options, and the joint force began to move to be postured, protected, and ready to respond. Thousands of service members, hundreds of fighters, dozens of fueling tankers. The Gerald R. Ford Carrier Strike Group, which was elsewhere in the Western Hemisphere, redeployed across the Atlantic to set the theater. They took a deep breath and began planning to conduct operations. And then, uniquely, in my experience of these sorts of briefings from Schwarzkopf and from Powell and from others over the last 35 years, he highlighted the work of reservists, the Wisconsin Army National Guard and Air National Guard units, including Vermont and Virginia. He said that it was their job to fly F-35s to the region, to put them in place, that the reservists here played an active role in preparing and making ready. And he said he wanted to shout out the unsung heroes of warfare, our logisticians and sustainment force, who are sitting in control room somewhere, watching everything, making sure that, material is being deployed in the right place, sort of like a kind of supply chain logistics thing. And then he said at 15:38 on Friday, the 27th of February, CENTCOM received the final go order from Trump. In the region, every element made their final preparations. Operational security was paramount as we sought to maintain the element of surprise. That was when Cybercom and Spacecom started layering non-kinetic effects on to blind Iran. And at 1:15 local, 9:45 Iran time, the skies surged to light. He said more than 100 fighters, drones moved synchronously. First Tomahawk missiles closed in on Iranian naval forces on the ground, precision standoff weapons, a massive, overwhelming attack, striking more than 1,000 targets in 24 hours. And the point that he was trying to make, not only it wasn't just to be self-congratulatory, was we have spent years learning how to integrate our forces, Air Force, Navy, Marines, Coast Guard, reservists, Spacecom, Cybercon, all of this, working painstakingly, training with allies, not only Israel, but the UAE and others. And all of this training, all of this work, all of this preparedness came together when it needed to come together in what he clearly believes was 57 hours of an extraordinarily successful initial effort to achieve the goals of this military action against Iran. I found it, listening to him, as is true when you hear an extremely assured, extremely competent person laying out what is going on. I found it very reassuring, comforting. He wanted people to understand. He said, I wish that the American people could hear what it sounds like on the voice communications, as I have from these joint communication centers, as they are transmitting messages across all of these different divisions of our military and elsewhere, how they remain calm and cool as they execute. So professionalism, he said they were steady, frosty, calm, and focused. Our service members are trained, disciplined, and determined. And so if what he was conveying was the sense that they know what they're doing. They know what they're doing logistically. They know what they're doing tactically. They are achieving unprecedented levels of success in a mission like this, which is unlike any other mission that we have actually undertaken. And we got an answer, by the way, to the question which has been raised over the weekend about who hit Khamenei, because there were two different stories going around. The initial story was that the Israelis hit Khamenei, and then Trump said, I got him. And then there were other stories about how actually the Americans hit Khamenei, and in fact, Hegseth confirmed that it was Israel and said they did a great job. And Hegseth was full of praise for Israel, contrasting Israel with other allies whom he was relatively contemptuous of. I assume he is referring to Keir Starmer, whose behavior over the weekend, as he desperately attempts to keep his weird Labor Party coalition together, so much of which depends on Muslim support inside Great Britain, that he was inconstant, weird, weak, then finally agreed to participate in some fashion. If you get a chance to listen to General Caine's briefing, which I think you can go to C-SPAN and find it, or I'm sure it's on YouTube, you should do so. Hegseth's behavior was a slightly different matter. But so that's where we are this morning. with a real sense of, he said, we have control of the skies, and that we are broadening our targets, and that what his job and the job of the military now, and Hegseth said this too, is to present the president with as many options and to make sure that we know as much as we can to know where we need to go next to achieve our goal, which is, they are not saying that the goal is regime change. They continue not to say that the goal is regime change. In fact, Hegseth attacked the idea of regime change. But what they have said, and what they said on Background yesterday, and what they're saying this morning, is that all Iranian military capacity, all conventional Iranian military capacity, is a cover for the nuclear program. And that one of the reasons that it was necessary to go to war was that as we sat there trying to figure out what our options were, Iran was sitting there with conventional weapons. Those are the ballistic missiles in particular. But that the entire ballistic missile program, which could then be deployed as a conventional strike force, is really there in the end to be ready to deliver nuclear material if and when they get to the point that they can have nuclear material. So there is no division between the conventional buildup of Iranian weaponry and the nuclear program of Iran. And so this argument that this was a war of choice and we didn't have to do it and there was no imminent threat, as it happens, there was an imminent threat to our forces gathered in the Middle East. If we're steaming in and we're just going to sit there, we could be sitting ducks if we don't go first, which I think was part of the motivation for going along with the fact that they heard that everybody was gathering in that one site, and that Israel could hit that one site and take and decapitate the leadership. So that's my summary of what we learned this morning.
It was such a good, capable summary that it by turn left me feeling comforted and secure.
That's my goal here. That's my goal. If I can comfort you, I can comfort our listeners.
You're like our emotional support host.
Yes.
I'm gonna disrupt your comfort a tiny bit with a few questions that I think the American people still have, and that I assume will be answered in due course by the administration, particularly because Trump, as we know, has issued these 2 videos, but hasn't yet really faced one-on-one with the media answering questions. So as many of our listeners know, I'm not a super fan of Pete Hegseth by any means, but I think one thing he did this morning that was really useful and helpful, and I'd like to see everyone in the administration continue to do this, is push back on the idea that this was a war of choice by Trump. Trump's war is how it's all being described in sort of mainstream media outlets. He correctly said there's a whole history. This is an ongoing conflict that we have had with Iran. He listed some of, many of the times when Iran has murdered our civilians, murdered our soldiers. And I think it's important to keep that context always in front of any discussion of what is coming next. Because right now we've had some mixed signals. You're right that Hegseth said it's not a regime change war, but the regime has surely changed. Trump over the weekend, sort of saying things like, well, they're bad guys. We want them out. Well, but the Iranian people will rise up and take their country back. Very vague. And then the question of how long it will last. We've heard 4 or 5 weeks. We've heard, lots of different things. That's completely normal in a circumstance like this. I understand that, but it is very crucial for this administration to start communicating sooner rather than later about some of their own goals as they come into more clarity for the administrators and their war planners. But I will commend Hegseth for that. I also think we need to spend a moment saying we're certainly sharing in the sad news that we've already lost a few American service members, and General Caine's acknowledgement that we will likely lose more. This is a war. People are going to die. And I think that also has to be something that Americans are prepared for, because that is not the normal situation for us in this country, thank God. But this is something where that question has to be answered by the administration. I think Trump will probably be pretty good at that, and he has a publicly available media thing this afternoon. We'll see if he takes questions on those. So I wasn't here over the weekend to share in the emergency podcast, but I'm so happy for the Iranian people who, although in a very difficult situation right now, have this opportunity to have been liberated from a theocratic regime, particularly Iranian women who've been repressed by this regime for so long. So there's a lot of, I hope, hopefulness in some of the remarks that Trump will make when he does engage the American people again on this question.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of what we're seeing also is that there's so many reasons to hit back at Iran that people who are when we're concerned, we're hearing conflicted justifications for the attacks. It's not really that we're hearing conflicting justifications. It's we're hearing different ones that are all valid, right? I mean, that I think is, they there's no question that Iran poses a threat to American troops in the region. Last year, their proxy killed two American service members too in Jordan.
I think you're right. It was three. I think it was three.
It was three. I thought it was. So, that's a recent thing that their proxies, during a war against Israel, their proxies also targeted and killed Americans on a base in Jordan. There isn't really a question that that's a threat. There isn't a question that they want nuclear weapons, because they keep saying, no, you could give us all the free nuclear fuel and whatever else we want. We offered them everything and that they could possibly need for civilian purposes. We offered them to have the energy and the fuel without having to even refine it and make it. I mean, we basically just offered to spoon feed them, whatever they wanted. And they said, no, we're going to enrich. So we know that they're building a nuclear we know that they want nuclear weapons. And then the third one is the proxies. Again, all of this, the Americans that Iran's proxies killed last year, that's two different categories, right? One of it is Iran is a threat to Americans in the region, and two, Iran's proxies have to be reined in and have to be stopped because they're killing people, they're killing innocent people, they're killing Americans, they're obviously killing Israelis, and so what I think we're seeing is that, like, what's the first one that comes to mind when you ask somebody why we're attacking Iran now? You get like the first thing that comes to their mind, but they could list all these different things. And it's not too concerning to me to hear one member of the government say, we don't trust what they're doing on their nuclear program, and a different member of the same administration say, well, they won't rein in their proxies and they're a threat to American troops in the region.
What's come to mind for me as this whole war has unfolded is this idea that people like us have been saying for a very long time, but it makes it so crystal clear that there has long been in place this kind of absurdity to our posture for decades that we even let Iran get anywhere near to this point in terms of its regional power, in terms of its arms buildup, in terms of its saber rattling, in terms of its expanding its power beyond the region, in terms of its going unavenged, our American deaths at Iranian hands having gone unavenged for decades. So it seems like a sort of cosmic, it's not even cosmic, a real world writing of just this crazy thing that we let get out of hand with our fingers crossed and a bunch of Band-Aids, 50 years worth of Band-Aids.
Right. And it's also like, so after 50 years, you hit it's like if somebody, were hitting you for 50 years and after 50 years, you hit them back. And what does the world say? Well, what's your plan exactly, Abe?
Right.
I mean, look, this is an
hit the guy back after 50 years, but what's your plan?
I mean, the point I think that is important about this 47-year conflict between Iran and the United States is that if you want, what would the plural would it be Cassi Belli? Like, if you want Casus Belli to explain the justification for a war, right? The cause of war, the reason that a war takes place. There have been 20 legitimate individual Casus Belli Iran has been responsible for that we could have justly, according to any understanding of just war, have launched a war to fight against. Not only the taking of the hostages, which was the original, but attacks on our people in the in Iraq in the 2000s, direct uses of Iranian proxies and probably regular Iranian forces inside Iraq to kill American soldiers. I think our count is that 600 Americans died directly at the hands of Iran during the war in Iraq. Remember, the entire war in Iraq was 4,400 casualties. So we're again playing commentary math here, but that's like, a seventh to an eighth of the casualties in Iraq directly caused, or deaths in Iraq directly caused by Iran, and various other incidents. Also the Beirut barracks bombing, which was done by Hezbollah, which is an
and in
Iranian
Iraq,
proxy.
they got Iranian material also. So you had
Right.
non-Iranian
Yeah.
militias killing
Right.
American troops
So-
with IEDs that they got from Iran,
So
or they helped
over and
build
over
or
and
whatever.
over again, they attacked us, and we did not respond. But is there like a statute of limitations? Is that what we're sort of being? It's like, well, if you don't do it immediately, it doesn't count. The point here is that Iran, as a destabilizing force, kicked into high gear on October 7th, 2023. Now, they did not directly attack us. They attacked an ally of ours. But on 7 fronts, Iran went to war with Israel on 7 fronts in an effort to, where Israel had to go to war with Iran on 7 fronts, maybe another way to put it. But had Israel not prevailed, Iran would have restructured the geopolitical landscape of the Middle East very much in its own favor in a way that would have been a direct threat to us. I mean, without question, they would have then had dominant, not only sort of reestablished their domination of most of Lebanon, solidified their position in Syria, strengthened their position vis-a-vis the Gulf states that are worried about them, meaning Saudi Arabia and others, weakened Israel, strengthened Hamas, and strengthened Yemen. And so that was a direct sort of threat to the United States. Israel dealt with it, and we then dealt with it with Israel by doing Operation Midnight Hammer. And as I think Brett Stevens said in his piece, but a couple of other people have said, after Operation Midnight Hammer, the Iranians could have said, okay, we're done. We're not going to reconstitute our ballistic missiles. We're not going to try to reconstitute our nuclear program. We're done. We're licked. You know what? This has been a stupid 20-year effort at nothing. Cost us, untold billions of dollars. All of our scientists have been murdered. We've been penetrated like no country has ever been penetrated by enemy intelligence services. You know what? Genug. We're okay. We're going to move on. And they didn't. They started buying material from, they're saying, importing things from China, buying material from North Korea, maybe taking stuff in from Russia, and just go just, okay, we're up again. And that's if you think about it, they didn't have to do that. Like, maybe they thought they would have to do it because, like Saddam Hussein, they would think that if the Iranian people knew that they were no longer, aggressively pursuing this aim, that would be the moment at which they would look so weak that the Iranian people would rise up to take them down. But again, counter history, weird. They say, okay, we're done. And then America goes, okay, well, we see you're done. We see you're like decommissioning all of these planes, and everyone's going home and all that, we'll relax some sanctions. We have these like hyper sanctions on you that are all based on this. You stop doing it. And then in December of 2025, the real isn't worth zero. Doesn't go to worthlessness. Iran's in a perfectly fine place financially, or not fine, but is not. And then there isn't an uprising. And then all of this clock doesn't start ticking. I mean, they brought this on themselves. They could have accepted and acknowledged that their nuclear program and their ballistic missile program was something that we viewed as an active threat, and that they should stand down. And they didn't stand down.
This gets to a bigger, larger point, and it gets to a topic that no one likes to talk about anymore, because then we start throwing around label neocon and this and that. The truth is, I don't want to share the planet with terrorist regimes, not merely because they do bad things to other people and that may or may not affect us, and maybe it's none of our business and all that. There is a much more practical aspect to why we should not tolerate terrorist regimes. They don't recognize lanes. You cannot expect them to stay in their lane. Their mission is to obliterate lanes. They are terrorist regimes for a reason, which is that they are trying to break down the system of which we are a part. And if you let that go, or if you try to give it a little bit here, take a little bit there, over time, the problem inevitably metastasizes. And that is what we're looking at. And I'm sorry, you can call it neoconservatism, you can call it whatever you want. It's just a simple fact of history that is what has got us where we are today.
So let's talk about this question of whether or not this is a war for regime change or not a war for regime change, because I remain puzzled by, and Hegseth began the morning by saying, we're not stupid like other presidents. We're not going around with open-ended missions of nation building and regime change. Donald Trump is smarter than that, and he has other things in his quiver. So I was trying to recreate in my head how regime change became the term of art here to describe our mission after the collapse of the Soviets and the Cold War, because this was not a term that was in use. We were not ever before, we were not looking to change, to do regime change. So why was this the term? And I think, oddly, it was an effort, though it now means the opposite to many people, at modesty. That is to say, we were going into war with Iraq in particular, but with Afghanistan. But our purpose was not to defeat the nation of Iraq or to defeat the nation of Afghanistan. Bush said it about Afghanistan and said it about Iraq. Our beef was not with the people. Our beef was with the tyrannical leaders who were oppressing the people and doing bad things to us. So if we go to war with them, all we're trying to do is remove the bad guys who threaten us, and then you get your country back, and we'll give you a hand when it comes to what happens after. We'll help you establish a system of elections. We'll bring in NGOs to help run those elections since you haven't had them in a long time. Or we could use your local traditions like Loya Jirga and tribal meetings and things like that to try to reconstitute this. We don't have a beef with you, Iraqis. We don't have a beef with you, Afghanis. In fact, we'd like to help you because we understand what monster we have had to deal with the monstrousness of your regimes. You're living with it. We're going to help you. It was an effort at a kind of, we don't have to go in and do what we did to Nazi Germany and to Imperial Japan and obliterate those, break the backs and wills and spirits of the entire country so that they knew they could not get off the floor and try to get off the floor or try to establish counterinsurgencies or whatever, right? That wasn't what we were up to. So in a weird way, they're way more hawkish. Trump and Hegseth and these guys are way more hawkish than the neocons.
This is interesting because one of the mistakes, I think, looking back on some of both the first and the second Gulf War conflicts, and then Afghanistan slightly separately, but that inability to kind of understand just how long and punishing we needed to be to get to the point where the people would be able to create their own more functioning way of life and government. We miscalculated on a lot of those. And I think what's interesting about this conflict is looking at, after the first several thousand targets that US and Israel have struck in Iran, look at the targets they're doing in the last 24, 36 hours. These are smaller security areas in the country, many of them along the borders of Iran. And these are the places where the most punishing security forces who keep the population in line, the people who were shooting at protesters, the ones who were in regional areas trying to quell these uprisings, we are striking those now quite vigorously and intentionally. And I think that is a sign of, I hope, a lesson learned from previous conflicts where you can't just take out the guy at the top and one or two of his henchmen, because there's this entire superstructure in countries like Iran of enforcement, and some of it's quite localized, but it reports to the top. But you do have to take out those units as well, because if you're going to rebuild, and this is another question I think Americans should be asking, who will be leading Iran in the near future and in the long term? You have to take those people out. And we were unsuccessful in doing that in some of our previous conflicts. We stopped too soon. We withdrew too soon. And there's lots of arguments about that over the years we've all had. But I think in Iran, I hope to see that lesson continue to be pursued, because the people of Iran will have no choice and have no options if that level of security state intervention, and they are armed and they are perhaps willing to shift their loyalty to someone new, if they're willing to continue to enforce the theocratic regime's vision for what Iran should be in the region, then we're going to be right back where we started.
I just want to say, I think there's something kind of silly about, or that's exposed, that's silly about this regime change knock, because everyone's no regime change. Unless you go to war with another country for a piece of land, like the Azerbaijan and Armenia, or to capture the entire country, like Putin and going into Ukraine. Every other war is a regime change war, in the sense that if you have a problem with another state power, you're fighting to change that regime, either in personnel, or when you're done, it's a different regime. We could be the same people, but it's not acting as the same regime. That is the point of an actual war with another country, unless it's about land. That is the end goal of fighting your enemy. I mean, you don't want to end the fight with the same enemy in place. So it is by definition regime change that you're looking for.
It's basically, I mean, if you look at the literature on this, is basically, not to bring in political science, but it's the only way wars have ended.
Right.
It's not even just the goal of the war. It's the only way wars end. If you look throughout history, the way to end a war is to change a regime and get a more pliant regime in place that is willing to play by the rules that you want them to play by. Now, you can argue, whether that's right or not, blah, blah, blah. the point is that that's how wars end, and that in
Right.
the real world, that's how wars end. And so the forever war argument against regime change runs into a problem, because the truth is that we're getting forever wars because we don't change the regime, and the regime
that's not
change is
the
how
only
you
reason.
usually end the war.
That's a
We've
very
often
important
picked
point.
the
Yeah.
wrong lead. I mean, I'm sorry, the whole history of Iran, the Shah I mean, we have in the past exercised that power in ways that have ended badly. Perhaps not the goal, but we have often put our weight behind regimes that we've, held up.
No,
Certainly
we
in
saw
Central
regime.
and
I
America,
think
and
that.
a little bit in Iran too. And the people turned against that.
Well, I don't think that's
arrangement.
right about Iran, but I do think, for example, that we did weird things in the early days of our conflict in Vietnam. We interceded to remove Diem and in '63 and change the government in Vietnam to one because we didn't think that they were in the right frame to do what we needed to do, and that was clearly a catastrophic error. But that was regime change in pursuit of a that was a friendly that we were on. They were on our. We were on their side, and then we wanted to do regime change. We've had that, like, we worked to change the political culture in El Salvador while we were helping El Salvador fight the communist rebels in El Salvador successfully, as it happens. So there have been regime changes, often friendly. The other, sometimes it works, sometimes it's really bad. The United States is unique probably in world history in that almost all wars are fought for, like 2 or 3 different reasons, right? Either seizure of land because that's what you do. You want to glorify yourself and make your country bigger and grander and dominate your neighbors, and that's that's Alexander the Great. Like, you go out in order. That's your purpose. Or you want resources. You want to take somebody's got something you want. You want to take it from them because it's valuable. Either a route to the sea for trading, and in the 19th, as the Industrial Revolution progressed, getting hold of raw materials that are necessary for the creation of the modern industrial state. We, in the last 40 years, have been fighting wars in a totally unique fashion. We staged this massive war against Iraq in 1990 for the purpose of pushing Iraq out of a third country that it had invaded, which was great. But then we stopped because we had defined the war as Saddam Hussein needs to be out of Kuwait. We didn't say, as Seth, which is why that war ended up being a failure long term, obviously, since we had to go in, we went in 12 years later. We didn't say, well, because he did this, he's got to go. Because if we let him stay there, he'll do a lot of other bad stuff. He's a bad actor. He's been a bad actor for 20 years. He started a war with Iran. We're not just sending in 500,000 people to fight in the Gulf to take out, to remove him from Kuwait. And then Colin Powell says to George Bush, we should stop now, because then we're just gonna, get everybody mad or something like that, So that's like the original sin in some ways was not doing what Seth says, which is the obvious logic is we just had to go fight a gigantic war, do something we didn't want to do. And the person who was responsible for it can't be left standing. It's crazy if you go back and think about it. What? 47 countries go to war to get Saddam Hussein out of Kuwait, and then Saddam Hussein is still in power 12 years later? What the hell was that about? That's not rational, because we are not an imperial power, despite what everybody thinks, because we were so worried that would look like imperialism that we stopped. And then we're like, oh yeah, it's okay. Go kill the Kurds as they try to rise up against you. We're going to let you fly your helicopters because you say you need to get around. So then you'll just, kill thousands of Kurds. That was our contribution to the good working order of the world after we had succeeded in this mission to get him out of Kuwait. So we didn't pursue regime change there ruinously, had to go back. And similarly, we would never have gone into Afghanistan in a million years, except that they hosted Al Qaeda on their territory. And that's the other reason you go to war, which is you have to go to war to revenge an injury that is done you, or to, and I use the word revenge honestly. Like, for some reason, people think revenge is bad. I don't think revenge is bad. We say in Judaism, when somebody is murdered, may God avenge their blood. Like, you don't treat a murder as though it is the same as a natural death, and you don't treat an aggressive act of war against you, or murder of thousands of your people, as though it is something for which you should mourn and then feel sorry and think that the people who did it should ask for forgiveness. So there's revenge, but then you want to then do something more, useful, or like better for the world. So you have to go in, you have to take out the Taliban. And then the question is what follows that? And as Charlie Wilson, I quoted yesterday, as Representative Charlie Wilson said, we did great, and then we effed up the end game, because we went in, we helped them, we set up elections, we did this, we did that, and then we took our eye off the ball. And we kind of left, and then the Taliban started reconstituting themselves. And then at the end of the decade, we had to go back in with 150,000 people to try to get Afghanistan out of the hands of the Taliban. And then we were in this war of attrition for another decade, until Biden made the catastrophic error to pull us out, thus leading Putin to believe that he had a green light to go into Ukraine. And thus the 2020s turned into what the 2020s turned into.
Well, and we are projecting forward a lot, because right now I think Trump is going to do fine doing what he's done so far, which is saying, I think he told CNN this morning, like, we're beating the crap out of him. A newer wave is coming. He can talk about the ongoing attacks and hits and what we're achieving strategically. But very soon he's going to have to speak to the domestic impact of this. Americans are usually going to be pretty tolerant for a few days or weeks about that. But then, oil prices are going to probably increase, already have started increasing. You have questions about whether and how many troops will be in the region. They have announced that they're sending more troops to the region, and they're cagey on, troops on the ground versus, support troops. So those are completely legitimate questions for the American people to have of this administration. And that's where I think it's been interesting to see how much control over the public messaging they've had over Trump for the last few days. But he will have to talk about that. He will have to say, these are our goals. When we reach these goals, we'll consider this a victory. We're doing this, this, and this, and we can expect some loss of life. We can expect some turmoil in the markets. The stock market is down. So all of these are issues that come up in any conflict that we start to pursue. But he has to be a good spokesman in these times. This is literally the president's role as commander in chief, is not just to lead this extensive strategic mission with our allies, but to talk to the American people about what he's doing and why.
I want to point out one other interesting thing that Caine said that speaks to a different political issue that people have been raising. It seems to me a disingenuous thing. I mean, I believe it constitutionally, but I don't believe in the seriousness and purpose of the people who are making the claim that Trump needed to go to Congress for an authorization of this effort. He should have gone to Congress, either gotten a declaration of war or some version of the authorization for the use of military force, like we did with Iraq. Caine, if I can find the quote, because I stupidly closed this file. Caine basically said that they needed to maintain operational security paramount as we sought to maintain and protect the element of surprise. So here's the question I want to ask you. While people say he should have gone to Congress, and Josh Shapiro said he should have gone to Congress, and David French says he should have gone to Congress, and Andy McCarthy said he would have preferred that he went to Congress, and, did all these, senators say he should have gone to Congress. Okay, imagine he goes to Congress. Are we maintaining operational security and surprise?
Well, and he did go. He briefed the leadership, both Democrats and
Yes.
Republicans, in
Yes.
Congress. They were
Yeah.
briefed before this event. It's not as if they were caught,
Yeah.
by
Right.
surprise.
But
They were briefed.
literally, if we are with forces in the region, then Trump says, "Hi, Congress, please vote on an authorization of military. Do it now, whatever." And this was the point that was made in this background briefing which is extensively detailed in Axios by Mark Caputo and Barak Ravid. That if you go to Congress, like they have all these ballistic missiles, and our ships are sitting there, and our bases are sitting there, and the Israelis are sitting, and we're not moving. So, in a circumstance like this, you want to move first to take out the offensive material that might hit you once you know that a war is starting. If we had a 2-week period in which we had a national debate over whether or not to undertake this mission, a national debate, which is what essentially people are trying to use as a cover for their keeping themselves at arm's length from saying whether or not they support what we're doing. That jeopardizes the safety of American forces worldwide and the ones in the theater from surprise Iranian attack, number one. And number two, and let's now talk tachlis. Like, you seriously expect that it wouldn't leak out of a meeting if there was like a big briefing of the Senate or of the House of what's going on and what we might do? I don't trust those guys. Now, if we were in a better position and this weren't the world that we live in right now, they wouldn't. But you think Elizabeth Warren wouldn't go out and tell everybody what was being planned, or Chris Van Hollen, or somebody like that? They can't be allowed to know our secrets.
The Office of Legal Counsel in previous conflicts has given a lot of thought to the legality of these sorts of strikes. My colleague Jack Goldsmith at AEI writes about this a lot. He has a good sort of summary of where the legal justification is for this. Regardless of what you think about whether we should be there or not, there are plenty of legal justifications for the short term. He's got some time and some leeway as the commander-in-chief. I do think that if this is going to extend into a conflict of many months and more troops and more lives are lost, then that actually is where Congress needs to assert itself and say, you got to come here and you got to talk about and lay out for us strategically what the plan is. So we will see if this is a sort of quick. I think Trump's preference, this administration's preference, is for something quick and done, and we're out of there. But we'll see if he wants to send more troops and he's going to need more munitions, and it's going to look more like a traditional war. Yes, he has to go to Congress. But for now, he's got a window of time where I think you're right, John. A lot of those claims are actual weasel words to prevent members of Congress themselves from taking a stand on what we're doing in Iran.
And just quickly, Mike Johnson has said last night that the House would take up the War Powers Act on Thursday, I believe, so that and the War Powers Act, as it's constituted, you pass the War Powers Act, and the president has essentially 60 days to go and ask for a formal declaration of war. That was how it was sort of like written in the 70s in an effort to make sure that we did not repeat the Vietnam situation in which we were at war, in a conventional standing war with hundreds of thousands of people, and Congress had done nothing to say that it was except appropriate money to say that it was a war that we should fight. So as it happens, the War Powers Act kind of worked in reverse, basically giving presidents a free hand to act in some ways, or having a defensible claim, as Jack Goldsmith says, having a defensible claim that the congressional role is only necessarily triggered 60 days after, or the full involvement of the legislative branch is only triggered 60 days after the beginning of hostilities. So that may happen this week. I don't know what the Senate is up to or will be about, but that's on the table.
I was just going to say, it's not just that Congress doesn't want to have to take a stand on the war. It's that the Democrats and a few Republicans want to preserve the ability to attack Trump over it should anything go wrong.
Right.
That's yeah.
I mean, or to jump on the bandwagon should everything go right.
Sure.
Let's do it in reverse here, or let's flip the script. Like Bush in 2002 said, weirdly enough, he said, "I don't have to go to Congress over Iraq because the what was passed in the wake of 9/11 gives me authorization to go into Iraq. But you know what? I want to go because I want." He said very like ominously. He said, "I want the Senate really, or basically, but I want Congress to be a participant. I want them to say yay or nay. Like if they say nay and we don't go, I want the public to know who said this was a good idea and who said this was a bad idea." Now, this may be amazing to people thinking about it 23 or 24 years later, but that scared the Democrats. Half the Democrats voted to authorize the war in Iraq, right? 24, 25 Democrats voted. It was 77 senators voted to authorize the war in Iraq. So it worked. That was then when it looked like if you didn't do that, and obviously we would win, they thought, so you better jump on the bandwagon. That was safer than not. And then, of course, it turned out that it was politically vastly more complicated, and Hillary Clinton lost to Barack Obama, who, of course, didn't have to cast that vote or not cast that vote because he wasn't in the Senate yet. But that was the politics then. Now, Congress, irresponsible, refusing to play its proper role. Republicans are worse, as bad about this as Democrats were under Biden. Terrible set of circumstances. But, yeah, so they've now gotten to this point where it's like, what can I do to keep my hands as clean as possible, or like to not get have to sully myself with actual politics. All I want to do is performative stuff. That's all anybody wants from me anyway, right? So, maybe this will back them into a greater sense of responsibility, though I don't.
There's another interesting
see that happening.
There's another interesting difference between the Bush and Iraq and what's happening today, and that's in the international politics in terms of international institutions. We're not even pretending that they have a legitimate role to play here, right? Bush, despite the cowboy diplomacy knock, was actually very, very desperate to get the UN on board, to get Europe on board with inspections in Iraq. Really thought that if he wanted to avoid war desperately, so he went multiple resolutions to the UN to say, no, we need to get inspectors back in there. We're hearing that Saddam has everything over and over. And, Jacques Chirac and Gerhard Schroeder, European leaders just said, they pushed by killing these resolutions. They pushed Bush into this, into the final last ditch effort, which was war. At the UN, we saw people fighting over the war after the fact, or this weekend. But
it was beautiful, though. It was beautiful because it was Danny Danon taking a 2x4 and bashing it over the head of the Iranian guy sitting there who said, "Stop yelling at me." And he's like, "Stop killing your own people, you piece of garbage." Like, it was one of the great moments of all time. Finally, an Israeli gets to like bang his shoe on the podium, in a position of total moral high ground with an Iranian, hack creep. Complaining that Israel was being uncivil.
Yeah, much better use of the UN than trying to get crooked European leaders to do something. Yeah.
Right,
Yeah. And there's
exactly.
also how we define multilateral, right? I mean,
Yeah.
There's
I
plenty of
don't know,
multilateralism going on,
UAE
right?
is not siding with Iran.
No,
They're siding with
Kuwait,
us, even though they're
UAE,
being
Saudi
fired on.
Arabia,
Like, if we have a
Egypt.
multilateral coalition that includes the Arab states and the Jewish state, that's multilateral to me. Maybe it didn't go through the UN, but it's like, okay, so Starmer is not part of it, but Keir Starmer is not the that hey, that's not my barometer for whether something is unilateral, multilateral. He's free to stay out of it. But I think they did this to Bush wrongly too. I think Bush he was putting together a multilateral coalition. And in Afghanistan, we obviously had a multilateral coalition. I mean, now we had NATO at our back. But he was the war began. The war responding to 9/11 began with an undeniably multilateral coalition. Countries saying we are all America. We all have your back. NATO there. Everybody sending troops. All this other stuff. And so I think, honestly, Bush got a bad rap on the unilateral stuff too. I don't think it was ever really true. But I think now it's like, if you can look at this and say, it's unilateral because the U.S. and Israel agree or something like that. But the truth is that these people, these critics, especially on the left, because of the split, this weird partisan coding of the Saudi-Iran split in the Middle East, where Republicans felt they were going to support the Saudis, Democrats supported the Iranians. This was during the Iran nuclear deal negotiations. It really became a partisan flashpoint and just kind of stuck there. This situation is like they've just been ignoring the allies that are part of the multilateral coalition.
Yeah,
the Jordanians scrambled to shoot down Iranian rockets at Israel during the first, a year and some ago or whatever it was.
And they did it this weekend too. 50 from Jordanian territory, 50 Iranian ballistic missiles were shot down. So that, of course, is a science fictional multilateral coalition we have going here. The United States, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar, UAE, Bahrain, Jordan, Egypt, and Israel. With
the space lasers, if you want to make the science fiction coalition really,
Right. Anyway, so I mean, the hell with the UN. Like this is the formation of an entirely new understanding of what it means to make alliances in the 21st century. The UN is an artifact and a relic of the post World War II era. You know how long ago that was? The UN was established. It's like, almost 80 years ago.
And this is the region where
this is the theater.
This is the theater.
Right.
The theater of war. They're on our side, part of our coalition. People miles out of it who are not participating are grumbling about it. But that's a ridiculous thing, is to replace the people who are sitting there having missiles fired at them by Iran and have, the French or the British say, oh, I don't know about firing back.
But this thing, because we'll use Starmer as the example, and then we can but I mean, this is a domestic political problem for Keir Starmer, who is in a domestic political crisis in which, having won this colossal landslide only a year ago, is seeing his entire coalition collapse, and he may not survive much longer, and his only hope is to somehow stanch the bleeding of the far left and the Muslims who voted him in. And so he's not making decisions based on Britain's national interest as is understood in terms of the world order. That's a no-brainer. Like siding against Iran. I mean, Iran just shot 30,000 people in the streets. It's not a hard call unless you're worried about your boroughs going to the Greens, as happened last week, while the anti-immigration party that isn't the Tories surges into the lead. I mean, it's a very, this is a very odd situation in which there's no principle attaches to what Starmer is up to. It's a desperate effort to cling to power. So it's pretty dismissible. It's not like, oh, what Bush is doing, it's cowboy diplomacy and Trump, even though you could say that about Trump much more readily. That's why I said that Trump's anti-regime change logic ends up being way more hawkish than the regime change logic does. And I just want to cite one, unexpectedly, I'm going to cite a publication I would not have cited before, but which has been crushing it over the last 6 weeks. And that is Compact, under the leadership of Matthew Schmitz. Schmitz has a piece today called Trump Was Always an Iran Hawk. And he goes through systematically, I think I strongly recommend you read it, everything Trump has said about Iran since 1980. In 1980, what historians Charlie Lederman and Brendan Sims describe as Trump's earliest recorded statement on foreign policy to a national audience, Trump said in an interview with NBC that America no longer commanded international respect because of the hostage crisis. And Trump said, we should have gone in there. He was asked, should we have gone in there with troops and brought our boys out? And Trump replied, I absolutely feel that, yes. And he went on, 87, 88, 2000. It's like, we need to go in, crush those Iranians and take their oil. He has had this view for 45 years. It hasn't changed. It's a consistent opinion that he has had about Iran, that Iran played us for fools and suckers. And it did, and it has, and he's right. And now, so it's just a very interesting.
No, I think it's such an important point, because a lot of what we're seeing on the right, on the disaffected right, is all this, I didn't vote for this. And then they play, as I said on Twitter, they sort of overlay real world politics with their Dungeons and Dragons idea of what's happening. Trump got co-opted by the Israelis. Vance was always a crypto neocon, in hiding and all this. And
I wish, yeah,
right. And they're just not looking at any of the actual real world circumstances and contingencies here and pressures, and they're missing the entire picture. And it's the childishness that they're evincing is astounding.
They also seem to forget Trump's age, and that he marinated in the popular culture of the 80s, which was just full. I mean, I remember pictures in my elementary school yearbook of all the high school guys with like, get the Ayatollah signs. I mean, this was part of popular culture too. And he was very much in the mainstream, seeing Iran as a constant villain. I mean, the Shiite Muslim was always the villain in all these big blockbuster movies. Yeah. So he's old. Just because his methods of politics are quite new to our system and of recent vintage, they have forgotten. And actually, many of them on the new right were never, they were not even a spark in their parents' eyes. I do want to just to piggyback a little bit on Seth's and John's absolute wonderful raking over the coals, the uselessness of the UN. An old recommendation, I think I made it years ago, but if people are interested in understanding just how long this rot has been going on there, the UN's founded in 1945? In 1967, the wonderful novelist Shirley Hazard, who had worked for the Secretariat, wrote a wonderful book called People in Glass Houses that's just tears to shreds the UN bureaucracy, and everything she diagnosed then has only gotten worse since. So if you're interested in a kind of
that is an amazing book. Thank you. Yeah, thank you for that. All right, so there we have a recommendation. Shirley Hazard.
Yeah, off the cuff, but yeah, I might have recommended this before, so I
think you did. And then we had a conversation about how Shirley Hazard played a key role in the outing of Kurt Waldheim as the Austrian chancellor as basically as a Nazi.
Transit of Venus, also a great novel. He's a great novelist. Yeah,
he had been the Secretary General of the UN.
She's a great novelist in general. If you haven't read her work, it's well worth reading her novels too.
Yes. Okay, so we'll be back tomorrow for Abe, Seth, and Christine. I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.